Good morning, YouTube. It's the weekend. Let's make some ductwork. I like to use a lot of round pipe. You see it in some of my videos. When there's room, like under a crawl space where nobody's really going to be, or even in a large attic. However, when you're in a basement and your headroom's at a premium, you about need to use rectangle trunk duct. This is 8-inch. You can see a 6-inch stick-on is a little large around the flanges, but it's easy enough to bend it over or cut it off. I usually just bend it over to try to keep the sharp edges away. This is stock trunk duct. Just buy it by the piece or by the case. But essentially, it takes two halves to make a piece of trunk duct. When you need to change from one width to another, they make these little transition pieces. You just end up cutting the side out of your duct and adding them in. This happens to be a 4-inch transition. I think they come in tooth probably through 8-inch at my local supply house. So in this case, I was going from a 16-inch duct down to a 12-inch duct. So you just cut that into the smaller duct and it makes a wider piece. I've put the mastic tape on the corners where there's a possibility for the mastic to actually goop through. I'm going to mastic up all these seams prior to insulating the ductwork. I will put this together in 8-foot sections because that's what's easy to haul and about all I can typically handle. Trying to put it up, you'll have to strap it up on one end, get it attached on the other end, and hopefully get it put together. It's easier with 2 people. I might have to enlist some help. But what I'm going to do is throw up a piece of this 12-inch wide trunk up on the table and cut out the side of it and put the transition piece in. I need one more transition to from the 16-inch down to the 12-inch. So I'm going to make that, and I will set the camera up and show you how I do it. Okay, I got a piece laying on the table here. As you can see, it just comes in 4-foot sections. Of course, you lose an inch or 2 when you put them together. The 4 foot is overall. The 2 pieces are identical. They put the drive or the S-lock on one end. All you gotta do is flip it over, get it started in the seam here, and hammer your way all the way down. Sometimes that seam will be marred up, especially if it's a piece that's been out of the box at the supply house and handled roughly. You can usually take a thin-bladed screwdriver and slide down through it, open it up, make it a lot easier to go together. Now when you put this thing together, you're going to have several layers of steel here. You can see the way the joint is made. So it's going to be very hard to cut through this should you try to do it after you put it together. What I'm going to be doing, see, is putting this transition piece in, which will make the duct actually start out at 16 inches and then reduce down to 12. So in order to do that, you have to cut this whole side out and part of the top and bottom, just about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch here. But what I will do is, instead of putting it together and then trying to cut it, I'm going to go ahead and cut the side out of at least the lower piece so that we can cut through this metal when it's still thinner. And what I'll do is take a measurement to see how much I need to cut out of this. I believe it's about 9 inches on this particular style thing, and usually it's 1/4 to 3/8 off the top and bottom of the duct. So I'll get that marked up, cut out, and we'll start putting it together. One thing I should have mentioned, since I've already started assembling my duct, you can see this pre-manufactured duct, they have some little indents here to hold your S-lock in place. And when you build your duct to take it out in the field and put it together, you need to make sure you've got your cleats going the same direction every time. As you can see, the way I've got this configured, it's actually going to go together end to end, and there's no S-lock at the top. So that means on the end that I'm actually getting ready to assemble going the other direction, I need to put my transition piece on the end that doesn't have the S-lock, so I need to turn this duct around before I cut it out. It wouldn't have been the end of the world. It would just been a little harder to put together out in the field, because I could have easily moved the S-locks to the other side. Just wouldn't have had those little indentions to hold it on there, so it's good to plan ahead. I'm glad I caught it before I started cutting. Here is the tough part to cut through. But once you get through it, it goes pretty good. Another good thing about filming this is if something goes horribly wrong and I slash my hand open, it would make for a good fail video. Okay, we've got our side cut out. Probably go down to this end. It's hard to do, but see how it starts to fit together? I just kind of line up the factory edge, start tapping it in with a hammer. I have a little brass hammer out on the van, but it's a cool morning and I really don't want to open the garage door, so I've got this rubber mallet. I'll just tap it together with it. I'm not going to leave the camera on for that because the noise would be really bad. And there it is, banged together with the opening cut in it. Ouch. For our new transition. After I told you I wasn't going to beat on this stuff on camera, sometimes you got to beat on it. See what happens? Might be better off starting my S-lock on this piece. That seam gets you right there a little bit. And then go back to this way. Good thing about it, once you put it together once, it goes together easier next time. He said. Get on in there. Bam. So that's what it should look like when you get done. Like I say, I usually you got little holes where mastic can easily seep through, so I usually put a piece of mastic tape on there prior to painting the whole mess up. And usually when I have one of these transitions in the field, or to go into the field, I usually try to go ahead and put the piece of duct on either side of it, because some of this stuff can get hard to put together, especially if you're over your head and holding it up. So what I'll do in this case is I'll assemble a piece of the larger duct, put it together here on the table, and use it as one of my 8-foot pieces. If it works out, I'll wind up with a 4-foot piece somewhere else down the line. That's so be it. But this is very much easier to put together on the table than it would be up over your head on a ladder. Okay, I have put together a section of the bigger duct and laid it up on the table. You can see how they'll go together there. Sometimes it's easier to take these S-locks off of the one-piece duct and put it over here on this 2-piece duct first, and then slip it all together and put your drives on. So I'm going to see what I can do with that. With this thing transitioning down so quickly, it's best to clip off some of your S-lock before you start trying to put it together. This side over here is a real son of a gun to get the drive on, so always start on the square side. Just like with the S-lock, where you have such a steep transition coming off of a piece of duct, you almost have to do a little trimming on the flanges. Do whatever it takes to get you started, and then let's see if I can set this where you can see. Then the drive will pull it back together. That's why it's important to do this on the ground, I wouldn't have had any fingers left up on a ladder trying to get this thing together. Okay, there she is, screwed together. And then I put the little tape at the corners to keep the mastic out. The next step would be to cut the takeoffs that happen to be in this section of duct. At this particular house, the joists are 16 inches on center, and I have already put my branch ducts in. I cut the holes where I was going to put them. I measured over to the center of the house where this trunk duct would be running, and made up my flex runs here on the table as well. It's just much easier to deal with mastic and tape and everything when you've got an environment like a table here versus on a gravel basement floor. So I took all those out and put them in. They're already in the joist bays or strapped up, and that's how I was able to measure my ductwork. Again, being on 16-inch centers, I have these takeoffs 16 inches apart as well. This is our 16-inch centers. You can see there's 48 inches between the first two, and then another 16 inches up to the next one. The only thing I have to be careful about is, again, this duct started out as 4-foot wide sheet metal, so when you slip it together, it overlaps an inch on each end, so you lose that inch. So what I do is I started with one piece, I think it was this one here, and then I just kept measuring accordingly. This piece of duct, that's going to be where they butt on the at the drive fold. So you can see, well, maybe you can see, if I can do this with one hand, there's truly only 94 inches, maybe 94 and a half of actual duct length once you put it together with another piece. So you have to keep measuring, and it'll keep growing. In a perfect world, this particular takeoff would have been 8 inches from the bottom of the duct, but it turned out to be 11 because I had to basically add 3 inches. I've lost 3 inches from where I started to where I got to here. So when I made my little, you can see my little chicken scratching here, the piece we were just measuring was this one. You can see there was the duct for the living room. It went 48 inches to a duct for the master bedroom, another 16 inches for a duct for the master bath. So that's the piece we were measuring. So as I make the next piece, I'll just have to measure from the last duct. I got to go from this master bath, I got to go 80 inches and then another 16 inches. So I'll make it accordingly. So I'm going to, I will have that piece of odd duct we talked about. Here is the 16-inch piece that transitions down to a 12-inch piece. It's already sitting over there. The piece we just made was actually this piece, 16-inch down to 12-inch. So I've only got one joint of 16-inch in between there, which is sitting here on the table. I'll put it together, and I will have to cut one takeoff in it for the dining room. So that'll be the easiest piece on the job to put up because it'll only have one joint. And then I'll go to my 16-inch that transitions down to 12. It will have a takeoff on one side for the front entryway and a takeoff on the other side for the dining room, and that'll go in this piece right here. Okay, I have assembled the single piece of trunk duct that I'll have. It'll go right here in my line chart. I don't know. I just did each one of these as 8-inch increments when I was trying to lay it out in my truck before I went and bought it after I measured it up. So the dining room, if you looked at it, you'd say, well, that's 8 inches in on this duct. But I did start with this piece, so it's probably pretty close. But if I come over here and measure, I made that piece 23.5 inches. This is where that next piece of duct will butt. So 23.5, and I needed 32 inches I confirmed that here on my chicken scratching. There was my living room, there's my dining room. It's 32 inches between them. So if I've got 23.5, I will need 8.5 inches on this duct. Get my tape measure, mark it both directions. So the X is where I will put a takeoff, which will be this takeoff, or this takeoff, which is for the dining room, and it's the only thing that'll go in this 4-foot piece of duct. I cut all my holes using a Malco hole cutter and a drill. I bought the small hole cutter first, the HC1, I guess. This is HC2. However, unless you're using it in a tight spot, if you buy one, go ahead and buy the HC2, because I use it for everything now. I don't even get the HC1 off the truck. You can go down to a very small hole, and again, unless you're in a small spot trying to circle it around, it's good to have this big handle out here to hold on to. So if you don't have one of these, I recommend you get one, and if you only buy one, I would buy the HC2, because you can cut holes up to it looks like 20 inches in diameter, and for most of us that's about as big as we would ever need. Always leaves a little burr right where you start and where you end, because it can't hold center when you come around and you're almost done. So I usually snip that off just in case I stick my hand in there. Anytime you measure something where you're measuring little segments and adding it up, you'll get a certain amount of error adding up as time goes. As long as your duct's not too long. And in this case, I started my measurements from the center, pretty much the center of the house, and going both ways. For instance, on this one, I needed 112 inches between this takeoff and the one I'm getting ready to cut. So I measured the 3 segments, added it up, and this is my measured mark. I would have been cutting the takeoff in the center of it right here. This is the actual when you put the duct together. So what is that? Maybe 1/4 or 3/8 of an inch, which would be fine. But anytime you can catch up and get it exactly, it's probably a good idea to do that, and then start taking all your measurements from the new one that you know is correct. Because if you lose an inch here and there, and you go 30, 40 feet, you might wind up plumb out of the joist bay by the time you get to the other end. But all in all, it's going to work out good. Okay, occasionally you're going to run into a situation where you can't put the takeoff exactly where you wanted to because of a seam. When we go to put this thing together, by the time we have our drive on here, and you have your stick on, you can see it's not going to be perfect, which is not a big deal. I mean, we've got a 16-inch wide stud bay and only a 6-inch duct. So I can scoot this over slightly, which will make my center line maybe be off about an inch in this case. However, if I do that and then come back and measure to this one, the next one will get off by the same amount and so forth. So I put me a mark on the top of the duct here and called it the measured center line. I'll go ahead and cut this in as close to this drive as I feel comfortable doing. But if I have to come back and measure to this one, I'll need to use this mark and not actually where this takeoff is. Okay, I was getting ready to finish up here with the last piece. I've got to have a cut piece. And so what I did, just to double check myself and see how we did, this is where I started the whole thing. That's the center of the house roughly. I had this little mark right here. This is a living room, takeoff for the living room. So what I did, I stretched the duct out here and then measured. All these had been cut in by measuring and adding up, so I laid it all out and measured from that initial takeoff down to this last one in this line. I was supposed to have 240 inches. I marked 240 inches, and as you can tell, that's probably within a 1/4 inch of being what I need. That would be this guy right here, the master bath. So I need 80 inches to a closet and 16 more inches to a master bedroom. I've laid them out on a full piece of duct, starting at an end cap. I dropped in 1 foot. Always best to run your duct past your last supply to give that air somewhere to get in there and swirl around and do different things, whatever it does. But anyway, we've got our 16 inches between those. So all I need to know now is what size duct I need to go between these two pieces and give me 80 inches from here to here, and I'll be done. I'll just take a piece of the stock trunk duct, measure it, cut it off before I ever put it together, and use my little Malco bender to bend my drives back on it. I'll show you that too. So I determined that I needed a piece of duct 42 inches long. That'll be from the drive here on the side, because that's where it kind of butts to the drive on the other side. I laid me up 2 halves up here on the table, and that 42 inches would be from the outside of this drive to the outside of the new drive that I'll have to form. However, you can see I cut the duct off 42.5 inches. That is for this little flap to bend back. So you have to add a 1/2 inch for your drive to your length, and then you can bend it back. I'll cut out these edges and take my little Malco tool, slide it on there and bend it back. Okay, here is the little folding tool. This is the 12-inch one. I have a 12, a 18, and a 24-inch. I think that's all they make, but they're worth their weight in gold. All I did was notch out 1 inch back into the corner. Also cut this back 1 inch and cut this thick seam bead off so that I can get my bender on here. These benders are made to where you can bend 1 inch on one side, or the 3/8, which really makes a 1/2 inch drive on the other side. So what we'll do, I'll slip it up on here and I'll try to set the camera up, and we'll bend this drive on this end of bare duct. See, that's about as far as I can bend it around, which is going to leave it open more than a factory drive. You can take pliers, or better yet, I got a little hand seamer that I can use to just squish it shut. Work it up and down until you get it about like what you think it should look like. That gives you a nearly factory edge on a cut piece of duct. Okay, I'm making the other half, and I've got to cut these corners back 1 inch. And I'm just going to show you, see the little mark I made on my 10 snips? I just usually just run it in that far. It keeps me having to measure. And I mean, it's not rocket science, it's duct work, so it's just got to be close, right? And if you've got enough room to lay the metal down on a table, it's not so important on this little 8-inch wide stuff, but if it's something long, like you're using your 24-inch bender, you will want to lay it down on a flat surface, because you can get a lot sharper, crisper bend by doing so. I can do this with one-handed. Get over here. Okay. Notice the tool has little holes to show you that you're all the way in too. Of course, I only get to see one of them in this case, but make sure it's firmly seated. But then when you bend up on it, you can push down against a solid surface and get a very nice, crisp bend out of it. And if you don't have hand seamers and you got it where you can lay it down like this, you can finish the bend off with a mallet like that and give you the same effect as the hand seamers. So there we go. We have our two halves of duct. I'll bang them together and we'll have all of our trunk duct assembled. And when possible, it would be a good idea to put the drive end that you make together again on the ground instead of on the ladder, because it's not going to be as perfect as the factory edge. So you may have a little more trouble. Stuff's hard enough to put together over your head anyway. So in this case, I'll turn the non-factory edge up to the piece that I'm going to be attaching it to and putting together as an assembly. Get us a drive here, and I will beat that together, which will pull that in. And we got a joint. I'll take these corners up, so get ready for the mastic, and then I'll be painting all this stuff.